Imagine walking into an ancient temple, dimly lit by flickering torches, the air thick with incense. You approach a carved relief depicting the miraculous birth of a divine child, foretold by the stars, his mother a virgin, his life marked by miracles, his death a sacrifice, his resurrection a symbol of renewal. Now, you might assume this is a depiction of Jesus Christ, the central figure of Christianity. But what if I told you that this very same story existed long before Jesus ever walked the earth? What if, across the ancient world, cultures separated by vast distances and centuries of time told eerily similar tales of divine beings, born of virgins, performing miracles, dying sacrificial deaths, and rising again? This is no mere coincidence. Throughout history, the mythic structure of the dying and resurrecting god has appeared in multiple traditions: Mithras in Persia, Krishna in India, Horus in Egypt, and even Dionysus in Greece. Could it be that the story of Jesus is part of a much older spiritual pattern? Or is there a deeper, esoteric truth hidden beneath these recurring myths? In this video, we will explore the ancient parallels between Jesus and other deities, unravel the mystical significance behind these repeating patterns, and uncover what they reveal about the nature of reality itself. Prepare to see the story of Christ in an entirely new light, one that transcends dogma and reaches into the very fabric of the cosmos. Historical philosophical context. To understand why so many cultures share strikingly similar divine figures, we must first step back and examine the ancient world, not through the lens of modern religion, but through the eyes of the mystery traditions, where myths were not mere stories, but encoded wisdom. Long before Christianity, civilizations from Egypt to Persia, from Greece to India, held sacred beliefs about gods who died and were reborn. These stories were not just legends, they were reflections of cosmic truths woven into the fabric of human consciousness. The ancients understood something profound. Life moves in cycles, death is not the end, and the divine manifests itself repeatedly throughout time. Let's begin with Horus, the Egyptian god of light. According to ancient myths, Horus was born of the virgin Isis, conceived through divine intervention. His birth was announced by a star, and he was heralded as the savior of his people. He healed the sick, restored sight to the blind, and battled the forces of darkness. And just like Jesus, Horus's story included a death and resurrection motif, where he descended into the underworld and emerged victorious. Travel east to Persia, and we find Mithras, a god worshipped by Roman soldiers long before Christianity took root. Mithras, too, was born from a miraculous event, performed great deeds, and was celebrated as a divine mediator between heaven and earth. His followers believed in salvation through him, and they even practiced a sacred meal, an early form of what Christians would later call the Eucharist. In India, we see Krishna, a divine child whose birth was foretold by celestial signs, just like Jesus. He performed miracles, healed the sick, and spoke of transcending the material world. His death, too, carried a deep spiritual meaning, promising liberation to those who followed his path. And then in Greece, there was Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy. His followers believed he was the son of a god, sent to bring joy and enlightenment to humanity. He too died and was reborn, symbolizing the eternal renewal of life itself. These are not mere coincidences. Throughout the ancient world, we see the same pattern: the divine hero, the miraculous birth, the trials and tribulations, the sacrificial death, and the triumphant resurrection. But why does this pattern exist? Is it because different cultures copied from one another? Or could it be that these stories are symbolic expressions of an eternal truth, one that transcends religion, culture, and history? To answer this, we must dive deeper into the esoteric meanings behind these stories. Because what we are looking at is not just history, it is a blueprint of the human soul's journey through enlightenment, suffering, and transcendence. Core Explanation, Part 1. The similarities between Jesus and other deities are not just historical curiosities, they are part of a much deeper, esoteric truth. To understand why these stories repeat, we must explore the nature of mythology itself. In ancient times, myths were not seen as mere fiction. They were encoded spiritual teachings, designed to guide the soul toward enlightenment. The story of the dying and resurrecting God is one of the most powerful symbols in human consciousness because it represents a universal process: death, transformation, and rebirth. But what does this actually mean? Let's take the symbol of the virgin birth, found in the stories of Jesus, Horus, Krishna, and others. On the surface, this seems like a miraculous event. But in esoteric traditions, virginity does not refer to physical purity. It represents the untainted, untouched nature of the divine soul. The birth of these deities from a virgin symbolizes the arrival of pure divine consciousness into the material world. It is the awakening of the higher self within the human experience. Next, we have the miracles. Jesus turning water into wine, Krishna lifting a mountain with a single finger, Horus restoring life. These supernatural acts are not just about power. They represent the ability to transcend material limitations. Water into wine symbolizes spiritual alchemy, the transformation of the mundane into the divine. Healing the sick and restoring sight to the blind represent the awakening of higher awareness, the ability to see beyond illusion. Then, there is the betrayal and crucifixion, perhaps the most dramatic element of the Christ story, and one mirrored in myths like the suffering of Dionysus, the sacrifice of Osiris, and the trials of Mithras. This stage represents the ultimate challenge of the spiritual path, the ego's resistance to higher truth. The crucifixion is the death of the lower self, the surrender of personal desires, and the passage through suffering into illumination. And finally, the resurrection, the moment where the hero triumphs over death itself. This is the core message of every spiritual tradition, that true life is not confined to the physical body. Resurrection symbolizes the realization that the divine self is eternal, untouched by suffering or mortality. The reason these stories appear again and again is that they mirror the inner journey of the soul. Every human being goes through a form of crucifixion, the struggle, the suffering, the loss of identity. But if one can endure, if one can move beyond fear and attachment, resurrection follows, enlightenment follows. But here's the great mystery. If Jesus' story is part of a much older pattern, does that make it less true or more true than we ever imagined? In the next section, we will go even deeper. We will explore the hidden forces behind these repeating myths, the esoteric traditions that preserve this wisdom, and what this means for you today. Core Explanation Part 2. If the story of Jesus echoes those of Horus, Krishna, Mithras, and Dionysus, then we must ask, where do these recurring myths originate? Are they simply copies of one another, or do they point to something far more profound? To answer this, we must turn to the perennial philosophy, the ancient idea that all spiritual traditions stem from a single universal truth. This truth is not bound to any one religion, but rather, it emerges in different cultures, wearing different masks, yet always carrying the same essential message. Throughout history, the mystery schools safeguarded this wisdom. In Egypt, Greece, India, and Persia, initiates were taught that mythology was never meant to be taken literally. It was a code, a key to understanding the nature of reality itself. The story of the dying and resurrecting God was not just about historical figures, but about the great cosmic cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, a pattern reflected in nature, the stars, and the human soul. Consider the seasons. In winter, nature dies. The trees shed their leaves, the cold sets in, and the earth lies dormant. Yet in spring, life returns. The sun rises higher in the sky, warmth returns, and the cycle begins anew. This natural cycle was deeply understood by the ancients, who saw their gods as personifications of these forces. Osiris, Dionysus, and Jesus, all of them symbolize the promise that life triumphs over death. But this story is not just cosmic, it is personal. Each of us experiences a kind of crucifixion in life. We suffer, we are betrayed, we face hardships that feel like the end. Yet just like these divine figures, we also have the power to resurrect, to rise above our limitations, to transform our pain into wisdom, to awaken to a higher understanding. This is where the esoteric concept of Christ consciousness emerges. The figure of Jesus is not just a historical person, but an archetype, a living blueprint for the awakened soul. To follow Christ in the mystical sense does not mean merely worshiping an external figure, but embodying the same divine consciousness within oneself. The ancient Hermeticists taught, as above, so below, as within, so without. This means that what happens on a cosmic level also happens within us. Just as Jesus, Horus, and Krishna overcame death, so too must we overcome the illusions of fear, separation, and suffering. The resurrection is not just about the afterlife, it is about awakening in this life, here and now. So why was this knowledge hidden? Why did these esoteric truths become dogmas and rigid beliefs, rather than paths to direct experience? The answer lies in power. Those who understood these mysteries knew that if people realized their own divine potential, they could not be controlled. They would no longer look to external authorities for salvation, but would instead find the kingdom of heaven within. In the next section, we will explore how this wisdom can be applied today, how you can awaken this divine pattern in your own life and undergo your own resurrection. If the story of Jesus and the many deities before him is more than just history, if it is a map of the soul's journey, then the question is, how do we use this knowledge in our own lives? The ancient mystery schools did not just teach philosophy, they provided practical methods for transformation. Their initiates were given tools to die to their lower self and resurrect into a higher state of being. These same methods are available to us today, if we are willing to walk the path. Sura 1. Undergo your own crucifixion. The crucifixion represents the death of the ego, the false self that clings to illusions, attachments, and fears. To follow in the path of the great spiritual figures, you must consciously let go of that which no longer serves you. Reflect deeply. What beliefs, fears, or attachments keep you imprisoned? Practice detachment. Realize that suffering comes from identification with the impermanent. Learn to observe emotions without becoming controlled by them. Embrace adversity. See hardships as initiations, not punishments. The trials you face are crucibles for transformation. At 2. Awaken your inner Christ consciousness. Jesus was not just a man, he represented an awakened state of being. The same divine intelligence that flowed through him is within you, waiting to be realized. Meditate daily. Stillness allows you to connect with the higher self, the part of you that is eternal. Practice selfless service. True spiritual power is found in love, compassion, and giving. Study sacred texts beyond their literal meanings. Read the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, not as dogma, but as encoded wisdom. Look for the deeper layers. 3. Experience your own resurrection. The resurrection is not about physical immortality, it is about spiritual rebirth. You must die to the old self to awaken as something greater. Shift from fear to faith. Trust in the cycles of life. No darkness lasts forever. Every winter has its spring. Reprogram your mind. Speak and think as if you are already your highest self. Your words shape reality. Live as an embodiment of higher truth. Do not seek external saviors. Become the Christ, the Horus, the Krishna, in your own story. This path is not for everyone. Most people remain bound to the world of illusion, never realizing their potential. But for those who seek, for those who dare to look beyond the veil, the ancient wisdom still speaks. The same journey that Jesus, Mithras, Horus, and Krishna walked is available to you. The question is, are you ready to take the first step? The shocking similarities between Jesus and other deities are not mere coincidences, nor are they evidence that one belief system copied another. Instead, they reveal something far more profound, a universal spiritual blueprint encoded into human consciousness, retold across cultures, ages, and civilizations. These myths are not just history, they are symbols of the great spiritual journey. The journey of the soul from ignorance to enlightenment, from suffering to transcendence, from death to resurrection. Whether it is Jesus rising from the tomb, Osiris emerging from the underworld, or Krishna guiding souls to liberation, the message is the same. Divine truth is eternal, and it is within you. But here's the secret that few dare to speak. The Christ story is not just about Jesus, it is about you. You are the one meant to undergo crucifixion, not in the literal sense, but by letting go of falsehoods, attachments, and illusions. You are the one meant to resurrect, to awaken to your highest self, to transcend suffering, to embody divine wisdom. This knowledge was once hidden in the great mystery schools, protected from those who would misuse it. But now it is in your hands. What you do with it is up to you. Will you dismiss it as mere mythology? Or will you see it for what it truly is, a sacred key to unlocking your own divine nature? The stories of ancient gods whisper a message across time. You are not just a mortal being, you are something more. The question is, will you listen?